It was a quiet morning, the kind that feels calm before the world wakes up fully. The sky was pale blue with soft streaks of gold spreading through the clouds. A man in his early 50s sat behind the wheel of his dark sedan, humming to himself as he drove through a quiet neighborhood. He had just finished his morning walk by the lake and was now heading to meet an old friend for breakfast. He liked simple things like that: peace, coffee, and friendly conversation. He was dressed in a plain polo shirt and light trousers, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed who he really was. Most people who saw him would think he was just another local, maybe a retired teacher or a quiet man who lived alone, and that was exactly how he liked it. He believed respect should come from how you treat people, not from the medals or ranks you've earned. As he turned onto a wide street lined with new houses, he noticed a patrol car parked on the side. He didn't think much of it at first. He was driving within the speed limit, his seatbelt was on, and he wasn't breaking any law. But then he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His heart sank a little. He looked down at the dashboard. Everything seemed fine. He pulled to the side of the road calmly, his hands resting on the steering wheel, just the way he had taught young soldiers to do when approached by authority. The police car stopped behind him, and after a few seconds, a young officer stepped out. The man watched him approach through the mirror. The officer looked stern, almost irritated, like he already made up his mind about something. The man rolled down his window halfway and greeted him politely. "Good morning, officer. Is something wrong?" he asked. The officer didn't respond right away. He leaned down, his eyes scanning the interior of the car, then back at the man. "License and registration," he said flatly. "Of course," the man replied. He reached slowly into his glove compartment, careful not to make any quick movements. He handed over his documents and waited. The officer stared at them briefly, then looked back at him. "Whose car is this?" the officer asked sharply. "It's mine," the man answered, still calm. "Where are you headed?" "Just to meet a friend for breakfast." The officer squinted. "You live around here?" "Not in this neighborhood," the man said. "But nearby." The officer let out a small laugh, the kind that wasn't friendly. "Uh-huh. You know this car model's been reported stolen in the area? Fancy car to be driving around without living here." The man frowned softly but stayed composed. "I assure you, officer, this car belongs to me. You can check the registration." The officer stepped back and spoke into his radio, muttering something. Then he returned, his tone even harsher. "Step out of the car. Is there a problem?" "Step out of the car," the officer repeated, hand resting on his belt. The man sighed quietly and did as told. He stood by the car, tall but humble in his posture. The morning air had grown still. A few people walking dogs slowed down to see what was happening. The man noticed them watching, but he didn't speak. He'd learned long ago that calmness is a kind of strength. The officer walked around the car, glancing at the plates and peeking inside. Then he ordered, "Sit on the curb." "Sir?" "I don't think that's necessary. I said sit on the curb." The man hesitated for a second, then lowered himself slowly, sitting with his hands on his knees. The pavement was cold against his legs. The officer stood over him, looking down with a smirk. "You got any weapons or drugs on you?" "No," the man said softly. "You sure?" "Because I can call backup right now." "There's no need for that," he replied. "I've done nothing wrong." The officer looked unconvinced. He began questioning him about where he worked, what he was doing in the neighborhood, and why he drove such a nice car. Each question sounded less like curiosity and more like accusation. The man answered each one patiently. "I'm retired now," he said. "I used to serve." "Serve where?" "In what, fast food?" The officer chuckled. The man looked at him quietly, choosing not to react. He knew anger wouldn't help. He had dealt with hostility before, in far more dangerous places than this. But it still stung. He thought about how easily people could misjudge others based only on skin or dress or tone. A small group of onlookers had gathered now. One young woman nearby had her phone out, recording discreetly. The officer noticed her and frowned. "Ma'am, you can keep walking," he barked. She didn't move. "I'm just standing here," she said softly. The man looked at her and gave a small shake of his head as if to say, "It's okay." He didn't want trouble for anyone else. The officer, irritated, picked up the man's wallet from the hood of the car and flipped through it carelessly. He tossed it back down, muttering something under his breath. The man asked politely, "May I have my wallet back?" The officer looked at him for a moment, then shrugged. You'll get it when I'm done. Sit tight. He walked back to his car to run the plates again. The man sat silently, eyes on the ground. The street was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic in the distance. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, watching him sit on that curb as if he'd done something wrong. Inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, but deep sadness. After all these years of serving his country, commanding people, leading missions, here he was, treated like he didn't belong. But he reminded himself to stay calm. Dignity wasn't about how others treated you. It was about how you carried yourself when they didn't. After what felt like an eternity, another patrol car appeared at the end of the street. The man watched as it pulled up behind the first one. Another officer stepped out, older, calmer, more experienced. He looked around, taking in the scene, the man sitting on the curb, the young officer standing by his car, the silent crowd watching. "What's going on here?" the senior officer asked. "Possible stolen vehicle," the young officer said quickly. "Driver doesn't live around here." Acting suspicious, the senior officer frowned. "You run his ID?" "Working on it," the younger one replied. The senior officer walked closer and picked up the wallet from the hood. He opened it carefully, reading the ID. His eyes froze for a second. Then he looked at the man sitting on the curb, and suddenly his whole expression changed. He stepped forward quickly. "Sir, please stand up," he said respectfully. The man rose slowly, not saying a word. The senior officer turned toward the younger one, his tone sharp now. "Do you have any idea who this is?" The younger officer blinked. "What? No, should I?" "This is Admiral Samuel Roberts," the senior officer said firmly. "United States Navy, retired." The young officer's mouth opened slightly. "Wait, what?" The older officer's face softened as he looked back at the man. "Admiral, I'm so sorry about this, sir. I had no idea." "This shouldn't have happened," the crowd whispered. The young officer looked embarrassed, staring at the ground. The man, still calm, said quietly, "It's all right, Sergeant. I understand. Sometimes people make assumptions." The senior officer nodded, his voice gentle. "Still, sir, you shouldn't have been treated this way." "I'll take care of it." The man looked at the young officer, who couldn't meet his eyes. Then he said softly, "Respect is something we all deserve, no matter who we are." The older officer handed him back his wallet, apologizing again. "Please, sir, let us escort you safely." "That won't be necessary," the man replied. "Just make sure something like this doesn't happen to someone else." He got back into his car. The crowd stayed silent as he drove away, leaving behind the flashing lights and the shame that hung heavy in the air. For a long moment after he left, the street stayed quiet. The young officer didn't say anything. He knew he had just made a mistake that would haunt him. He hadn't just stopped a man. He had humiliated someone who had spent his life serving the very country he swore to protect. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light across the pavement, the senior officer looked at the younger one and said quietly, "That man has seen things you can't imagine. Next time, think before you act." The young officer nodded slowly, his face pale. The lesson would stay with him far longer than any warning or punishment ever could. The video of that roadside stop started spreading within hours. Someone from the crowd had uploaded it online, and by afternoon it had already been shared thousands of times. People couldn't believe what they were watching. The calm, polite man who had been told to sit on the curb like a criminal was, in fact, a highly respected Navy admiral. The clip was less than 2 minutes long, but it told a powerful story about assumption, pride, and how people can be treated unfairly for no reason. The man himself didn't know about the video until later that evening. He wasn't someone who spent time online. After he returned home, he simply sat in his living room, quietly reflecting on the day. His phone had been ringing constantly. Calls from old friends, messages from people in the Navy, even from local news reporters. He ignored most of them. What happened earlier wasn't something he wanted turned into drama. He was tired, not angry, just deeply disappointed. When he finally answered a call from an old colleague, the voice on the other end was full of concern. "I saw what happened, sir. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," the man said softly. "It was just one of those moments." "Moments like this shouldn't still be happening," his friend said. "You deserve better than that." He gave a small sigh. "We all deserve better. I just hope people learn something from it." By the next morning, his name was everywhere. News channels were running the story. Social media was flooded with comments and people were demanding answers from the police department. Most of the public was outraged. Some couldn't believe an officer could treat someone that way without reason, while others said it showed how quick people were to judge based on appearance. The man watched one of the news reports quietly. He wasn't proud of the attention. He had spent his whole life keeping a low profile, doing his duty without asking for recognition. But now his face was all over television. His calmness during the incident praised as remarkable restraint. To him, it wasn't about being calm, it was about choosing not to let anger control him. The police department, meanwhile, was facing heavy pressure. Reporters waited outside the station asking questions. Why was he stopped? Was it racial profiling? Will the officer be punished? The department released a short statement saying an internal review was underway, but people wanted more than that. They wanted accountability. Inside the department, the young officer who made the stop sat alone in his car, replaying the scene in his mind. He hadn't been able to sleep. His name hadn't been released yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Every part of him regretted how he had spoken, how he had acted. When he saw the video online, it made him sick to his stomach. Seeing himself towering over a man sitting quietly on the curb, it didn't look like control or authority. It looked cruel. He remembered how confident he felt that morning, certain he was just doing his job. But looking back, he saw arrogance. He realized he hadn't seen the man at all. He had only seen a picture his own mind painted. A stranger in a nice car, in a nice area who didn't fit the image he expected. And that assumption had made him act without thinking. That afternoon, his supervisor called him in. The chief sat across from him with a serious face. "Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" the chief asked. "Yes, sir," the young officer said quietly. "You embarrassed this department. You disrespected a man who spent his life serving this country. And you did it on camera." "I know," he said. "I didn't mean, it doesn't matter what you meant. What people saw is what matters." The chief sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You'll be placed on suspension while we investigate. I suggest you take this time to think very carefully about what kind of officer you want to be." He nodded silently. As he walked out of the office, he saw other officers looking at him, some with pity, some with judgment. He couldn't blame them. He had brought shame to his badge. Meanwhile, the man, the Admiral, continued his quiet routine. But life around him had changed. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Strangers came up to thank him for handling the situation with grace. Some even shared their own stories of being treated unfairly. He listened to them, each one leaving a mark on him. One young man stopped him outside a coffee shop and said, "Sir, watching you stay calm in that video, it gave me hope. I usually get angry when things like that happen, but you showed a better way." The Admiral smiled gently. "Anger burns fast," he said. But calmness lasts long enough to make people listen. At night, he thought about what the event meant. Maybe it was more than just an accident. Maybe it was a chance for people to see what needed to change. He'd always believed that respect was not a privilege but a basic right. It wasn't about titles or ranks, it was about humanity. The department soon held a press conference. The police chief stood before cameras, stating that the department deeply regretted the incident and would take appropriate action. When asked about the officer, the chief confirmed he was on leave pending investigation, but the Admiral wasn't focused on punishment. He believed what mattered more was learning. He didn't seek revenge. In fact, when a reporter asked if he wanted the officer fired, he said, "I don't wish harm on anyone. I just hope he understands why what he did was wrong." "We all have lessons to learn," his calm words went viral again. People praised his wisdom and grace. But there were also voices online saying, "Why forgive? He should be punished." The Admiral read some of those comments and shook his head. He knew anger could be easy to spread, but forgiveness took strength. A week later, he received a letter from the police department requesting a private meeting. They wanted to offer a formal apology. He agreed, though he wasn't sure what to expect. When he arrived, the chief greeted him respectfully and thanked him for coming. The young officer was there too, standing in the corner looking nervous and pale. The chief spoke first, apologizing on behalf of the department. Then he turned to the young officer and said, "You have something to say." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir," he began, his voice shaky, "I just want to say I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong. I misjudged you. There's no excuse. I've been thinking about it every day and I can't change what I did, but I'll never forget it. The Admiral studied his face. There was no arrogance there anymore, only remorse. He nodded slowly. I accept your apology, he said quietly. But make sure this moment means something. Don't let it pass and forget it. Let it change how you see people. The young officer nodded, his eyes lowered. It already has, sir. After the meeting, the Admiral walked out of the building, feeling a strange mix of sadness and peace. He knew change didn't happen overnight. But even small moments like this one mattered. Outside, a reporter asked him for a statement. He simply said, "We can't control how people treat us, but we can control how we respond. That's where real strength lies." That night, the city news aired the clip of his words. Across social media, people shared them with messages like, "This is leadership," and "This is how we heal." For the young officer, that day marked the beginning of a long journey. He started attending community programs, listening to people's stories, understanding the weight of his actions. It wasn't easy. Many people didn't want to hear from him, but he kept going. He knew he couldn't erase what he'd done, but he could make sure it never happened again. As for the Admiral, life slowly returned to normal. He went back to his walks by the lake, his morning coffee, his quiet reflections, but something inside him had shifted too. He began speaking occasionally at local schools and events about respect and patience. He didn't talk about what had happened directly. He didn't need to. People already knew. When he spoke, his message was simple. Don't let anger guide you. Don't let pride blind you. Everyone deserves respect, no matter what they look like or where they come from. If we start there, we'll be a better world. His story became more than just a viral video. It became a reminder. A reminder that the smallest act of humility can change hearts, and that even the most painful moments can carry a lesson worth sharing. And though he never sought attention or praise, his calm example continued to inspire people long after the cameras moved on. Days passed, and though the noise around the story started to calm down, its echo was still felt everywhere. For many people, the Admiral had become a quiet symbol of dignity and strength. His face appeared on magazine covers, his quotes shared across the internet. But for him, none of that mattered much. He still believed fame was fleeting, and what stayed behind were the lessons people learned. He continued to live his days simply. Most mornings, he took the same walk near the lake where he liked to watch the sunlight ripple across the water. The stillness gave him peace, but it also gave him time to think. He thought about the officer, the one who had stopped him. He thought about how a single moment could change the course of a life, both his and the young man's. One morning, as he walked along the trail, an older woman approached him. She smiled softly and said, "You don't know me, but I want to thank you. My grandson is a young black man. He saw your video, and it changed how he thinks about dealing with the world. You showed him that being calm doesn't mean being weak." The Admiral smiled back warmly. "I'm glad it helped him," he said. "Tell him strength isn't about shouting. Sometimes it's about standing still when everything around you is shaking." The woman nodded with tears in her eyes and walked away. Moments like that touched him deeply. He realized that sometimes a painful experience could become a bridge, something that connected strangers through understanding. Meanwhile, the young officer was walking a very different path. His suspension had given him time to reflect, but it also forced him to face himself. For the first time in his life, he questioned what kind of person he was beyond the uniform. Every day he replayed that moment, the look in the Admiral's eyes when he sat him on the curb. It wasn't anger he saw there. It was disappointment. That look had burned deeper than any punishment could. He began reading books on empathy and communication. He attended community meetings organized by local residents. Some people ignored him. Others challenged him openly. At first, he wanted to defend himself, to explain that he didn't mean it that way. But he realized that wasn't what people needed to hear. They didn't want excuses. They wanted him to listen, so he did. At one of those meetings, a community leader asked him, "What made you decide to come here?" He paused before answering. "Because I was wrong," he said, "and I need to understand why I acted that way. I can't fix the past, but I can change what I do next." That honesty surprised people. Some nodded slowly. Others stayed quiet, but they could see he meant it. At the same time, the Admiral received a letter from the city council inviting him to speak at an upcoming event about equality and respect. He hesitated at first. He wasn't a public speaker and he didn't like talking about himself. But after some thought, he agreed. He felt that if his story could help even a few people see things differently, it was worth sharing. The event was held in a large community center, filled with people from all walks of life, students, officers, teachers, parents. When the Admiral walked to the stage, the room went silent. He didn't wear his uniform that day. He came as himself in a simple gray jacket and calm smile. He began softly. "I didn't plan to stand here today. I'm not a politician or an activist. I'm just a man who had an experience that reminded me how easily we can forget to see each other as human beings." He told the story briefly, not to relive the humiliation, but to show what it taught him. "That morning," he said, "someone saw me and decided I didn't belong. He saw my skin, my car, and made up a story in his mind. But the truth is, we all do that sometimes. We all carry pictures of what we think people are like. The problem is when those pictures blind us." As he spoke, the audience listened quietly. His voice was steady, filled with grace. "I don't want sympathy," he said. "I want understanding. Not for me, but for anyone who's ever been judged before being known." After the speech, people stood and applauded. But what happened next was unexpected. The young officer, sitting in the audience, stood up slowly. He had been invited by the city to attend the event as part of a new program connecting police officers with community leaders. When the Admiral noticed him, there was a brief pause. The two men locked eyes across the room. The officer hesitated for a second, then walked forward, microphone in hand. "Sir," he began quietly, "I don't deserve to speak after you, but I need to." The room fell silent again. "I was the officer who stopped you that morning," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, "and I've spent every day since then trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I wish I could undo it, but I can't. What I can do is learn. What I can do is change." The Admiral looked at him carefully, not with anger, but with quiet thought. The young man went on, "I judged you without reason. I let my own bias speak louder than my duty. But listening to you today reminded me what real strength looks like. It's not in a badge or a gun, it's in how we treat people, especially when we think we're in charge." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Admiral slowly stepped forward and extended his hand. The officer took it, visibly emotional. The room erupted into applause, not the loud, chaotic kind, but a soft wave of respect. It was a rare sight. Two men on opposite sides of an incident finding peace in front of everyone. Later that evening, after the event, the two men sat down privately. The Admiral asked the officer about his family, his dreams, his goals. It was a simple conversation, but it carried weight. The officer confessed, "I joined the force because I wanted to protect people. I never realized how easy it is to lose sight of what that means." The Admiral nodded. "Protection begins with understanding," he said. "You can't protect someone if you don't see them as human first." They talked for almost 2 hours. When they parted, there was no promise of friendship, but there was mutual respect, a bridge built from regret and forgiveness. In the days that followed, that moment from the event spread online too. People shared photos of the handshake with captions like "Growth is possible," and "This is how change begins." It became a message of hope rather than division. But for both men, the real change wasn't in the cameras or the headlines. It was internal. The Admiral continued his quiet work, mentoring young people and speaking occasionally about leadership and compassion. The officer returned to his job after completing his suspension, now working directly with a new outreach program that connected police with local youth. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because he knew what it felt like to fail and wanted to make it right. One afternoon, several months later, the officer received a handwritten note in his mailbox. It was from the Admiral. The message was short: "Keep walking the path of understanding. Real change doesn't happen overnight. It happens every time you choose respect over pride." The officer smiled and folded the note carefully. He kept it in his wallet as a reminder of the day his life changed, not because of punishment, but because of perspective. And as for the Admiral, he continued to live as he always had, quietly, humbly, grateful for each sunrise. He still believed that life had a way of teaching us through unexpected moments. Some lessons hurt, some healed, but all were meant to make us better. In time, people stopped talking about the viral video. New stories took its place. But for those who had seen it, the memory never faded completely. It wasn't just about a traffic stop, it was about what it revealed. It showed that respect isn't earned by rank or title, but by humanity. And so, long after the cameras turned away and the world moved on, the story of that morning lived on quietly in hearts and minds, a reminder that even the most painful experiences can lead to the most powerful transformations. Months passed quietly after that public event, but the effects of what had happened didn't fade away. For the Admiral, life settled into a gentle rhythm again, yet something within him had changed. He was no longer just a retired officer living a peaceful life. He had become a voice that people listened to, not because he sought attention, but because he spoke from the heart. He continued to receive letters and messages from people across the country. Students, teachers, even police officers who said his story opened their eyes. Some of the messages were long and emotional. Others were just a few words saying, "Thank you." He read each one carefully, often late at night, sitting by the lamp in his study. It amazed him how one painful experience could reach so many hearts. Sometimes he wondered if the young officer who had stopped him truly found peace after everything. He didn't hold any bitterness, but he hoped the man had learned enough to walk a better path. He believed that forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about allowing growth. One afternoon, he was invited to visit a police academy as a guest speaker. The academy had started a new program that focused on empathy and communication in law enforcement. The organizers wanted him to share his story, not as a victim, but as someone who had seen both sides of authority. At first, he hesitated. He didn't want to sound like he was lecturing anyone, but after some thought, he agreed. He knew change required honest conversations, even when they were uncomfortable. The day of the event arrived. The hall was filled with young cadets in uniform sitting upright, eyes fixed on him. Some looked nervous, others curious. He stood at the front, holding no notes, speaking purely from memory. "I wore a uniform for most of my life," he began. "And when I did, I believed it stood for honor, discipline, and service. But I also learned that a uniform doesn't make you honorable. Your actions do." The room stayed completely silent. He continued, "There will be moments in your careers when your power will be tested, not by criminals or danger, but by your own judgment. In those moments, remember this. The person standing in front of you is not just a suspect or a stranger. They're someone's father, mother, friend, or child. Treat them the way you would want your family to be treated." As he spoke, the faces in front of him softened. Some took notes quietly, others just listened. He ended his talk with a line that stayed in many minds. "Respect doesn't flow from authority. It flows from humanity." After the session, a few cadets came up to him, eager to shake his hand. One of them said, "Sir, I joined because I want to make people feel safe. Thank you for reminding me what that really means." He smiled and said, "Then never forget to see people as people first." Meanwhile, the young officer was living with his own transformation. He had gone back to work, but things were different now. He had joined the department's new community relations unit, working on projects that brought police closer to residents. Every week he visited schools, attended town meetings, and listened to people's concerns. At first, some people didn't trust him. They recognized him from the video and kept their distance. But he didn't give up. He kept showing up, listening, learning, and proving through his actions that he was no longer the man he once was. Slowly, people began to see the change in him. He never forgot the words the Admiral had told him. Respect over pride. Those 3 words became a quiet rule he lived by. Whenever he faced a tense moment on duty, he reminded himself to pause, breathe, and look at the person, not the situation. One evening, after finishing a community meeting, he got a message from his captain. It was a request for him to attend a regional seminar on ethics and public trust. The captain said they wanted him to share his experience, how one mistake had changed his life. He was hesitant. He didn't like revisiting that memory, but then he remembered how the Admiral had faced his pain publicly to create change. So he agreed. At the seminar, he stood in front of a room full of officers, journalists, and community leaders. His hands shook slightly as he began. "A year ago," he said, "I made a mistake that I will never forget. I judged a man without knowing him. I thought I was doing my job, but I was really following my assumptions." He spoke honestly about the shame, the guilt, and the long road of reflection he had walked since then. "The man I stopped," he continued, "could have destroyed me if he wanted to. But instead, he showed me something I didn't deserve, impatience. He taught me that sometimes the people we look down on are the very people who can lift us up. When he finished, the room was silent, not out of discomfort but respect. Afterward, several people approached him to thank him for his honesty. One senior officer said, "It takes courage to admit you were wrong in front of others. Keep walking that path." Later that night, as he sat in his car before driving home, he thought about how different his life had become. He was no longer proud of his past behavior, but he was proud of how far he had come since. Across town, the Admiral was invited to speak again, this time at a national leadership summit. His topic was grace under pressure. He spoke about the importance of emotional control not just in the military or the police, but in everyday life. When we're faced with anger, our reaction defines us, he said. You can't always control what people do to you, but you can control what you give back to the world. That choice shapes who you become. He didn't mention his incident directly. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. The quiet strength in his voice told the story. After his talk, a young journalist approached him backstage. "Sir, what gives you the strength to stay calm in the face of injustice?" He smiled gently. "Because anger is like fire. It burns fast and leaves ashes. But calmness builds things. It teaches. It lasts." As months turned into a year, the story that once divided people began to unite them in conversation. It was no longer about blame, it was about awareness. Police departments across different states began to use the Admiral's experience as a teaching example. His video wasn't shown for shock value, but as a lesson in empathy. The young officer also became quietly involved in that movement, working behind the scenes to train new recruits on respectful conduct. He didn't want recognition. He wanted redemption. One day, the Admiral received a letter with no return name. Inside was a simple message. "I wanted to thank you again. Your kindness saved my career and probably my soul. I will spend the rest of my life earning that forgiveness. I hope you're well." The Admiral read it twice and smiled. He didn't need to know who it was from. Some lessons, he thought, don't need names attached. Only sincerity. Life continued, and both men found purpose in their separate paths. The Admiral focused on mentoring young leaders and veterans, teaching them that power means little without humility. The officer kept serving quietly, believing that every respectful interaction was a step toward rebuilding trust. One afternoon, fate brought them together again. It was at a charity event for veterans and first responders. They met by chance near the entrance. For a moment, both froze, unsure what to say. Then the Admiral smiled and said, "Looks like we're still serving, just in different ways." The officer laughed softly. "Trying to follow your example," he replied. They talked for a few minutes, not about the past, but about the future, about what could be done to make the system fairer, kinder, more understanding. There was no tension, no awkwardness. Just two men connected by a story that had changed them both. As they shook hands again, the officer said, "Thank you for not giving up on people like me." The Admiral looked him in the eyes and said, "We can't build a better world if we give up on each other." That night, as the Admiral walked home under the quiet evening sky, he felt a deep sense of peace. Sometimes, he thought, the hardest moments in life are not meant to break us, they're meant to open our eyes. And though the world still had much to learn, he knew one thing for sure. Change begins with understanding. And understanding begins when someone chooses to see, not judge. Years passed. But the story of the Admiral and the officer continued to echo in quiet corners of conversations, classrooms, and community halls. People still talked about it, not because of the humiliation that had once taken place, but because of the change that came after. It became a story of second chances, growth, and the quiet power of respect. The Admiral, now older and a little slower in his steps, spent most of his days mentoring young people. He had opened a small leadership center in his town, a simple place with a few rooms, a library, and a small hall for discussions. His goal was to guide the next generation to lead with empathy, not ego. Every week, groups of students and young officers visited him. They came to hear his stories, not about war or medals, but about life, choices, and how one act of patience could change everything. He often said to them, "You can't control how people treat you, but you can control what you teach them through your response." Those words stayed with everyone who met him. He had learned that real strength didn't come from rank or power, it came from restraint. from choosing peace when anger felt easier. That was his quiet mission now, to teach that kind of strength to others. One evening, as he closed the center and locked the door, he looked at the sky turning orange with sunset. It reminded him of the day everything had started, the day he had been pulled over and judged without reason. For years he had turned that pain into purpose, but even now sometimes it felt heavy to remember. He wasn't angry anymore, but he couldn't forget the silence that followed him that day. The eyes of bystanders, the feeling of being less than human. It wasn't the event that hurt him most. It was how common such things were for people who looked like him. He wished the world could change faster. But when he saw the young officers visiting his center, listening, learning, trying to do better, he knew change was happening, even if slowly. That same week, he received a letter inviting him to a national ceremony to honor citizens who had made a positive impact on police-community relations. It was being held in the Capitol and his name was on the list. He smiled softly when he read it. He never did what he did for awards, but he appreciated the gesture. It meant people were paying attention to what mattered. Meanwhile, far away, the young officer, now older himself, was still serving but in a new role. He had become a training supervisor, helping new recruits learn the right way to handle tense situations. He made sure every lesson went beyond the rules. It had to touch the heart, too. Whenever he stood in front of a class of cadets, he remembered the day he met the Admiral. That single moment had been the turning point of his entire life. He never forgot the look in the Admiral's eyes, not of hate but of disappointment mixed with calm. That look had followed him until he became the man he was now. One morning, as he reviewed the training schedule, a fellow officer walked in holding a newspaper. "They're honoring that retired Admiral next month," he said. "You should see this, he's one of the main guests." The officer froze for a second, then slowly took the paper. There it was. An old photo of the Admiral shaking hands with young cadets smiling with quiet pride. Reading about it brought back every memory, every emotion he thought he'd left behind. He folded the paper gently and said, "He deserves it." For the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Part of him wanted to attend to see the Admiral again, to thank him properly, one last time. But another part of him wondered if it would even be right. He didn't want to bring back the past for the man who had already moved on. Still, something deep inside him told him he had to go, not for himself, but to close that chapter with gratitude. When the day of the ceremony arrived, the hall was filled with people from different backgrounds, leaders, officers, families, students. There was warmth in the air, not formality. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. The Admiral sat near the front, dressed simply in a navy blue suit, looking calm as ever. His eyes scanned the crowd, not expecting anything, just taking in the moment. As the ceremony began, several speakers came forward to talk about change, trust, and how small acts could lead to bigger shifts in society. Then the host called the Admiral to the stage. The audience rose in applause as he walked up slowly, his steps steady and sure. He didn't use the microphone right away. He just stood there looking at the faces before him. "I never thought I'd be standing here for something like this," he said finally, his voice warm and steady. "Years ago I experienced something that could have filled me with bitterness. But instead, it taught me that we can't fight darkness with more darkness. We change things by shining a little more light." He paused, looking around. Every person here has the power to make someone feel respected or small. And that choice defines who we truly are. The hall was quiet as his words sank in. When he finished, everyone stood up again, clapping not just for his speech but for the grace he carried with him. As he stepped down, a figure in uniform walked toward him from the crowd. It took him a second to recognize the familiar face. When he did, his eyes softened immediately. The officer stopped in front of him and said quietly, "I didn't know if I should come, but I needed to say thank you, in person." The Admiral looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm glad you did." They stepped aside to talk privately for a few minutes. No cameras, no attention. Just two men who had shared a difficult truth. "I still remember everything," the officer said, his voice low. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about how wrong I was.